Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. The Legend of the Ant People. In the southwestern part of the United States, also known as the Four Corners region, there are still some descendants of the Native American Hopi people living in the area. The Hopi were split into several tribes, including one formerly called the Anasazi. Now known as the Ancestral Puebloans, these people lived in the desert and built huge dwellings on cliffs and rocks between 550 and 1300 AD. Then they vanished. The Hopi people's traditions were rooted deeply in nature with a respect for all living things. They lived according to natural law and believed in something a little different from most other religions of the ancient world. The Hopi didn't look to the sky and tell stories about gods in the heavens. Instead, they believed gods came from the ground and sprouted upwards like potatoes. They also believed that there were giant ants living inside the earth, like strange insect overlords that ruled everything from their subterranean lairs. That's not to say they didn't still have great respect for the stars in the sky. The major archaeological sites in the Four Corners match up almost perfectly with the constellation of Orion. It looks as if the Anasazi made their settlements based on the shape of Orion, with one settlement for each connecting star. And then there's the whole thing about the ants. Some experts believe it wasn't ants the Hopi Native Americans were talking about at all, but actual extraterrestrial beings who lived in the ground. This is reflected in many of the petroglyphs found throughout the southwestern United States, showing curious beings seeming to hold all the universe in their hands. Number 9. Mysterious Viking Cave Network. In the summer of 2021, a series of very mysterious man-made caves were discovered southwest of Oddi, that's in Iceland, with the artificial caves dating back to the 10th century, to the era of the Vikings. In the recent past, researchers have worked very hard to excavate the mysterious tunnels and figure out just what in the world they were used for. What they've accomplished so far is to reveal a massive system of interconnected subterranean passages. This place is like a primitive underground labyrinth, like an ant's nest hidden underneath Iceland, and yet researchers still haven't been able to figure out the true purpose for the construction of such an immense and complex network of caverns. Archaeologist Kristborg Porsdottir said she had no words to describe the discovery. That's how mysterious it's been even for the scientists involved. Kristborg said that never before have such large structures been studied from the 10th century in Iceland. This could be the biggest building project the Vikings ever made, and yet experts can't figure out anything about it. What we do know is that Oddi was originally the seat of the Oddverjar Clan, one of the most powerful groups in Viking history. Other things have been found nearby, like an old church, a farm, and a vicarage. Oddly enough, Oddi was one of the first places 1,000 years ago to build a church when Christianity found its way to Iceland. Still, that doesn't really help with the mysterious tunnels. Hopefully, researchers will make some headway soon, or at least figure out how deep the mysterious caverns go. Number 8. The Shanidar 3 Cold Case. The fossilized skeleton of a Neanderthal man was discovered inside the Shanidar Cave in Iraq back in 1957. But between 1953 and 1960, 10 individuals were excavated from the same cave. It proved to be the largest single sample of Neanderthal fossils uncovered anywhere on the planet. But the one that was found in 1957 proved to be the most fascinating. Neanderthals date back to around 45,000 years ago. These were the very definition of cave people. They lived deep in the shady nooks and crannies of Iraq's caverns, where they slowly learned how to use stone tools and make fire. But that's not all they were learning in their cave homes. They were also figuring out how to commit murder. The skeleton is currently on display at the Hall of Human Origins, and from what the archaeologists can determine, this man is the oldest unsolved cold case in the world. An inspection of his bones revealed he was about 40 or 50 years old, stood about 5'6", and died from a stab wound to his chest. The depth of the wound shows that whatever he was stabbed with pierced his chest and collapsed his lung. We don't know for sure if that was what killed him, but it appears to be the very first known homicide, or at least attempted homicide. Number 7. The Mini Coffins. In the 1830s, a group of schoolboys were hunting for rabbits in the Scottish countryside near Edinburgh. According to the legend, these boys found a small opening in a rock on the northeast side of Arthur Seat, which is a local hill. Hidden in that small opening were 3 slabs of stone, And when the boys pushed those slabs of stone aside, they discovered 17 miniature coffins. The coffins were arranged in 3 rows, with each one just under 4 inches long. The coffins were made from pine wood and contained within them small humanoid figures. They looked like tiny sarcophagi with mummies inside of them. These bizarre relics became known as the Lilliputian coffins. To this day, experts don't have an answer for what they were doing behind those stone slabs. Each miniature doll buried inside its own little coffin has a unique set of clothing. These tiny pieces of fabric were stitched together and then glued around the figures, turning them into tiny people. It's all quite creepy, and nobody knows who put them there or why they were made. It's been almost 200 years, and all we have are theories. Some say the dolls were used in satanic spells or witchcraft. Some archaeologists think they could have been part of an ancient burial custom. But according to George Dalgeish, the keeper of Scottish history at the National Museum of Scotland, the coffins were probably connected to Burke and Hare. They were a pair of serial killers who murdered 17 people in Edinburgh, and many historians agree that they could have left exactly 17 tiny figures buried in coffins, representing their crimes. Number 6. Treasure in the Seychelles. There is possibly a pirate treasure worth over $100 million hiding on an island in the Indian Ocean. Many islands in the Indian Ocean are said to be littered with treasure from one pirate or another, but this one is supposed to be the holy grail of pirate treasure, the biggest pile of loot never discovered, and the story of it has been passed down through the generations. It's said to be somewhere in the Seychelles, which means there are 115 potential islands where the treasure could be buried. The tale begins in 1716 with a pirate by the name of Buse, or the Buzzard. In 1721, Buse killed every man on board a Portuguese galleon in the port of Bourbon Island, today called La Reunion. This Portuguese galleon was filled to the brim with unbelievable treasures: gold, silver, raw diamonds, goblets made of pure gold, and gemstones. It was massive. Realizing they had struck actual gold, the pirates fled to their headquarters on the island nation of Madagascar. They divided the booty, Buse vanished, and he supposedly buried what he had taken somewhere in the Seychelles, probably on the island of Mahé. Still, this mystery is unsolved because nobody has ever found the treasure. A local resident named Reginald Herbert Cruz Wilkins searched for it for 27 years until he died in 1977. His son John, to this very day, is still looking for the lost treasure. Number 5. Blackbeard's Silver Skull. In Hampton Roads, Virginia, there is a spot called Blackbeard's Point. It's said that after Blackbeard was killed in his last battle in the year 1718, his head was severed, put on a pole, and then erected at Blackbeard's Point overlooking the Chesapeake Bay. It was a deterrent for any who would turn to a life of piracy. The head of the famous pirate sat on that pole for several years until it vanished. After it was gone for some time, it showed up at a pub in Virginia. Somebody had lined the skull with silver so that it could be used as a drinking goblet. It traded hands multiple times for the next 200 years. Finally, in the 1950s, maritime historian Edward Rowe claimed to have come into possession of the skull. After he died in 1982, his widow finally handed the skull over to the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. The mystery here is that we don't actually know whose skull was sitting in the museum. It was definitely a human skull, but there was never any physical evidence that it actually belonged to the pirate captain. Even though the Peabody Essex Museum did lend the skull out at least one time for an art exhibit, the museum no longer has the silver-plated skull on display. Number 4. The Sun Dagger. High atop the Vajada Butte in Chaco Canyon is something strange. There is a set of spiral petroglyphs carved into the cliff just behind 3 large slabs of rock. According to the experts, these are solar markers. On the summer solstice, a vertical shaft of light pierces through the main spiral precisely at its center. And on the winter solstice, 2 shafts of light do the exact same thing. And on the spring and fall equinoxes, slivers of light cover the center of the smaller spiral to show a change in seasons. Basically, at the top of the Vajada Butte is one of the oldest observatories in the world. It's now known as the Sun Dagger. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly who made this observatory, nor how they even figured out the complexity of it. The best guess archaeologists have is that it was the Anasazi, the mysterious Native Americans who built their desert homes nearby. But there is no way to know for sure, and unfortunately in 1989 the place was irreversibly damaged. Because of so many visitors climbing all over it, the sediment shifted and the light no longer hits the spiral on the summer solstice. This has rendered the observatory useless after roughly 1,000 years of working perfectly fine. Number 3. The Phaistos Disc. On the Greek island of Crete, hidden in plain sight for 4,000 years, is an unsolvable mystery. It's called the Phaistos Disc, and it was found in the great Minoan palace of Phaistos. The disc was originally identified by an Italian archaeologist in the early 20th century. There are many different settlements and palaces scattered across the old Greek island, which was once home to the great Minoan civilization. And in all of them, researchers have found some kind of writing, be it tablets of Linear A at the Palace of Knossos or Linear B at the Hagia Triade site. But at Phaistos, there is no trace of any writing, and it made little sense considering how huge and regal this palace once was. There should have been some kind of writing somewhere, and in 1908, archaeologists found it by way of the Phaistos Disc. The artifact is a circle of clay about 16 inches in diameter. That's about the size of a frisbee. It was made in the 2nd Millennium B.C. in the Bronze Age and is stamped with 241 unique tokens, which in total comprise 45 distinct signs. These were made by pressing seals into the disc when it was still soft. The mystery is that nobody has ever decoded these 241 tokens. We know the tablet says something, but nobody knows what. It's so confusing that most archaeologists have simply chalked it up to a hoax, even though it's confirmed at over 2,000 years old. Maybe archaeologists are so stumped they'd just rather pretend the disc didn't exist at all. You should probably take a crack at it and see if you can decipher the code. Number 2. Giant footprints. Some photographs have been circulating of a man's bare foot resting inside of a giant footprint stamped into the rock. This footprint is surprising because it's clearly about 5 times larger than the average man's foot. The only thing that may have left a footprint like that would have been a dinosaur. And yet, judging by the shape of the print and its distinctly human toes, it appears to have been made by an enormous person. Of course, we don't know if this is true. The original story appeared in 2016. It said the footprint was first discovered in fossilized rock in the Pingyan village of China's Guizhou province. But there have been no professional archaeologists who have confirmed this. All we have are a few pictures, a flaky story, and some amateur archaeologists who claim the humanoid footprint is 200 million years old. So, while fascinating to think that giants could have existed all that time ago, nobody can definitively say they didn't. But according to experts, this particular footprint is probably a fake. Number 1. The Yadé Girl. The corpse of the Yadé girl was discovered by Dutch laborers in a swampy bog back in 1897. She quickly became the world's most infamous bog mummy. She died 2,000 years ago, possibly at the hands of an executioner or some crazed cultist who used her as a human sacrifice. She died between the years 54 BC and 128 AD. She was discovered with a rope still tight around her neck, stab wounds around her collarbone, 1 foot and 1 hand cut off, and part of her pelvis stuck in the mud. As if all this wasn't horrible enough, the girl was only 16 when she wound up in the bog. Plus, researchers believe she had a major case of scoliosis and barely stood over 4 feet tall. Nobody knows for sure what happened on the day of her death all those thousands of years ago, but using the archaeological evidence for inspiration, researchers have a pretty good idea about why she was killed. They think that because of her scoliosis, the girl was singled out to be used in a ritual child sacrifice. She was taken away from the borders of her village, there was a small ceremony, and she was stabbed, strangled, and thrown in the muck. It's technically still unsolved, but this is the best theory that anyone has come up with. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe and come back soon for more amazing videos on ancient history. See you next time. Bye!